Yeah? Right?
Yes.
Deal?
Boing.
Welcome to the Acquia podcast, Drupal technology, community and business.
Welcome to the Acquia podcast, Drupal technology, community, and business.
There's a module for that?
Of course there is. This is kind of cool. We're in our shared office in Cologne, and we're talking today. Please introduce yourself and tell us what you're about.
Okay, sounds easy enough. Hi, I'm Sebastian, and it's 2016 now. So about 15 years ago, I started to work on a tool that is called PHPUnit.
How can testing save people time and frustration? We've just talked about how writing your first tests is painful. Fine, but once you get used to it, how does it actually help you?
I always think about tests as an investment into the future. It's incredibly hard to believe if you have never done it and have not been doing it for a couple of months, because you have to make this experience yourself. It's one of those things that most people don't believe when they are told or when they read about it. You have to make the experience yourself. It's an investment into the future, like I said. So today I have the requirements for, some process of my application, and I implement that. And then in 6 months' time or next year, something changes. And I make the change, and I don't know, if I don't have tests in place, that by making that change, I did not break anything else that used to work. But if I have tests in place, I first go in, and if I do test-driven development, then I change the test first to reflect the new requirements. I run the test, and the test will not work. Of course.
Sure.
The software has not been adapted yet for that. I also like to think about tests as being an executable specification and or documentation of my software. So I've changed my specification. Okay, so I've written down in code what the software should do. And then I make the change. And now the test can tell me two things. Yes, the thing that you wanted to change now behaves in the way that you wanted it to behave after the test. And more importantly, all the other things around that were not supposed to change have in fact not changed.
I've definitely heard it described as, like you say, it's documentation that can tell you when it's accurate.
Some people say, well, it's double the work that you have to do because you're basically writing the software twice.
But like you said, it's an investment in the future because it makes any change or any pivot or any addition to what you've written much, much easier and much more efficient and much more, with a lot less risk in it.
So it reduces the risk, but it also reduces the time that it takes. And that's the most fascinating thing. And there are plenty of studies out there from Microsoft, from Ericsson, from IBM that said, okay, when a team starts to introduce test-driven development, for instance, for the first couple of months or so, they will be 15 to 30% slower than they used to be because they have to learn a new tool. They have to wrap their head around a new process. But after that, they become much more productive because they spend almost no time on debugging anymore.
Because they're testing before they commit.
Yes.
I mean, actually, when we think about it that way, then the value of the tests is increases proportionate to the complexity of the application.
Yes.
If you're writing a 15-line PHP snippet, writing a test is not going to be helping you. But it's not going to help you. But on the other hand, if you're writing a piece of code that has to integrate into a really complex, multi-headed application, I'm looking at every Drupal developer in the world, then writing a test for that 15 lines can make a really big difference for you.
That is true. And I don't remember who said it, but there's also a saying in the testing community that doesn't go about the size of the project, but they say you don't need to test code that never changes.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are really, really sure that the piece of software that you have just written will never ever change, then don't waste time writing tests for it. Because you have just written it and you have done some manual testing around it to make sure that it works. And there's no need to invest in automated testing.
Does that exist?
Yeah, how often does that come?
Never. but so often. But you wouldn't believe the kind of conversations I had with management at customers, or been told by developers from conversation they had with their management or their customers, that, oh, we need this piece of software. It's a one-off thing. The software will only ever be in production for 2 weeks before this event and 1 week afterwards. And then we delete it. Oh, but it was so successful. And now we keep it. And now it's running for 10 years. And where the hell do these problems come from? And what were the developers thinking? Why didn't they do their job properly? Because nobody told them that this was going to be in production for such a long period of time.
The Drupal project lead, Dries, often, I've heard him say often, be careful about your temporary solutions. They're the ones you're going to have to live with the longest.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
In Cologne, we have a tent, which is a theater behind the main train station. And that was supposed to be there for 1 year. And I think that year was 1997, about the time you started PHP.
Yeah.
And it's still there. And it used to be a parking lot. And,
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So, hey, so swinging around back to our DrupalCon session topic. PHP 5.3 introduced namespacing, which means that applications can talk to each other even if they have,
Similar names.
two things that are called date or two things that are called address or whatever. They can and cooperate. And so there's been this, you talked about how the PHP project split up and siloed itself in 1,000 shards, right? Since namespacing happened, we've had that enabled Jordi Bojano to create Composer, right? Which brought dependency management into PHP, so I can pull all my stuff in and make it play nice, and I can use components from other people. And the framework interoperability group, PHP FIG, came together and started defining different standards. What's your perception on this on the technical side of this PHP renaissance?
That's more than one question. And I'll try to pick them apart and answer them in no particular order. So yes, namespaces were an important feature that was left out of PHP 5.0. In hindsight, I have no idea why we missed it or how we could have missed it. And why it took until PHP 5.3 to bring it in. But in the end, we got it, and it solved a lot of the most important technical problem that you described, so that we could collaborate. In all fairness, you probably can say that PHP 5.0 was an alpha, 5.1 was a beta, and 5.3 was the first one that was... Never mind.
Drupal 6 was 5.2 compatible guaranteed. 5.3 is supposed to work. So the older Drupal developers all remember the limitations of 5.2 very well.
The PHP project made a big mistake, in my opinion, when PHP 5.0 came out, to not announce an end of life for PHP 4.
Yeah.
Something that we learned for PHP 7. This morning, the voting closed for the PHP 5 support timeline. So we now have a definite cut-off date for PHP 5 support.
Which is it? What is it?
Tuesday.
December 31st, 2017. 2016 for active support, and December 31st, 2018 for security fixes.
Okay, 3 years to get off of PHP 5, everyone.
Boy, 1 year, really. Wow.
Active support.
Active support. Yeah,
Bug fixes.
Yeah.
Security fixes for 2 more years.
Okay, so
start off 7.
Composer.
Composer was a big step forward for basically it was the logical next step after we had federated pair. So when Stieg Bakken started to work on pair, there was just one central repository in the spirit of CPAN and CTAN and whatever, which was a big problem. And then that was solved by Greg Beaver's evolution of the pair, so that you could have separate pair channels and everybody could host their pair packages. People didn't like that. People hated the pair installer and the whole pair thing for various reasons that I not always understood. So the logical next step was to completely rethink this and get inspiration from other programming language communities, how they solve this problem. And that's what we got with Composer. I'm still not entirely happy with Composer. So for instance, security is something that still needs to be addressed. And I'm a big fan of tangible release artifacts, like really have a tarball that is signed with a GPG signature and so on. That's something that we don't have with Composer, but I think eventually we'll get there. Something will come out. So Composer was important. It allowed a project to pull in dependencies with ease, and that was important.
And the PSRs, PHP FIG itself, defining logging interfaces, defining how to store stuff, how to think about stuff, allowed, I think, with these 3 ingredients in place, allowed the Drupal community, for example, to build the first meta PHP product, right? It's pieces of Symfony, it's all these external libraries, it's our own code, everybody's happy, it works perfectly all the time, right? No, but
I wasn't supposed to laugh out loud.
But I contend that Drupal 8 is a sign that PHP is in a new phase now.
It's definitely in a new phase. For me, that phase started with something different, though. For me, that phase started when the PHP project started to use RFCs for major language changes.
When was that?
Good question. Sometime around 2006, 2007, and it did not start in a planned way. It started with one new contributor coming to PHP, and one of his first emails to the internals mailing list was, and the developer I'm talking about is Stefan Ma. He had a problem that he wanted to solve, and he was at that time still studying computer science at the university in Berlin, and he was, just like I was, exposed to unit testing at university, which led to PHPUnit. He was exposed to the concept of traits at university. And it was immediately clear to him, okay, this language concept would solve my problem that I currently have in PHP, in my PHP application. And he came to the mailing list describing his problem, saying this is what, and then concluding this is what academia says about it, but I don't want to bore you with the details. Here is the syntax that I propose to add to PHP to implement that concept. And by the way, here's a patch that implements the feature. Here are the tests, and here is the documentation.
Oh,
it's a very good way to get your work actually reviewed and committed.
Yes. And it was the starting point of a discussion on the internals that said, wait a minute, this was a really good experience. We want that for every future language change.
So this was the beginning of the professionalization of the PHP development itself. Sure.
So for me, that was an important step forward for the PHP project itself. Not a little bit later, it started with Composer and PHP FIG and so on. And to be honest, personally, I'm a bit skeptical whether PSRs for logging, caching, HTTP and so on are really that valuable if there's actually a problem that they solve, and if there's a problem, if those PSRs are the right solution to that. But
on the other hand,
I
other
believe
people...
you when you tell me from the Drupal community's perspective that they solve problems.
Right. And conceptually, at least, other people definitely argue that, hey, if I was talking with Lorna Jane, who's a big fan of Monologue, right? Let's say Monologue at some point in time doesn't do what you need anymore, or you have a better way to write a logging solution. If your application, if your product, whatever it is following that standard, you know that your thing, you write a wrapper for it, you write it in the same way, you can plug and play, and that's got to be valuable in the same way in terms of efficiency and reliability.
Boy, I really think about it in terms of expanding the power of the developer. That it used to be, when I came to Drupal, I had to learn not only an entirely new API, but new coding standards, new ways of thinking about fundamentals that I thought I understood from my work with WordPress and with Elg and with other PHP-based CMSs. And I see the PSRs as a way out of that. That modern development shops, actually the first place we're giving this talk is in India, where lots of developers are asked to learn new languages really quickly. Somebody signs a contract that says, you're going to learn this language. Sure, you can figure out Drupal, right? And if you already know the standards from your work in a previous project, it really reduces the curve, I think.
Sure.
As one of those guys that gets asked to learn a lot, so it seems helpful for me.
And on a very pragmatic level, for us as Drupal developers, learning Drupal 8 means that actually we can go and use anything that uses Symfony components and have a pretty good idea of what's going on, because we've got 9 of the important ones in Drupal 8, right? So this commodity functionality idea, I think, is a real accelerator for, I think developers can benefit from that too.
Does Fig make any difference for you in terms of running PHPUnit?
I've never been involved with PHP FIG.
I mean,
so
I don't. The coding standards one has been accepted now. So can I start submitting like really mean issues on your GitHub?
Coding standards was one of the first, right? So PSR1, PSR2.
Yeah.
I really like those. And all my open source projects by now are PSR2 formatted.
So no.
Yes. So and of course, I'm very German about my code. So
it's a good thing.
It has to be formatted the way that I want it formatted, which is PSR2. And but most of the time, when I get a pull request and the pull request itself is okay, but the formatting is not okay, then I pull it and then clean it up myself. But sometimes I only have the time for that, even though it's now tooling that does that. So I like PSR1 and I like PSR2. The PHP doc one, I don't understand why that still has not been officially accepted. I think that one is very valuable. And with the others, I always like to be proven wrong, and I can just express my skepticism about it.
How do you feel about PSR 8?
What's that?
Which one is that?
That's the huggable interface.
That's your favorite.
It is my favorite because Larry Garfield is the editor, and it exports one of the most precious bits of Drupal culture is that people are really affectionate in Drupal, and it's nice. It just feels nice. So anyway, listen. Why should Drupalists be excited about PHPUnit?
I'm not really a good salesperson. I already said earlier that at least to me and to many other developers, it eventually is lots of fun to do the testing. But seriously though, testing changes your perspective on how you code, on how you work. and it solves so many problems. And the least of which, in my opinion, is that you're sure that the code does what it is supposed to be doing. You get so much valuable feedback while you're writing the test about the quality of the code itself that you're testing, and that you rethink, oh, I could do this in a different way to reduce the headache that I will have maintaining this code over a longer period of time.
I think you're a great salesman for your product. That's a really valuable proposition right there.
Actually, I wanted to ask for one more specific for the managers out there. We talked before about the learning curve. When you start testing software, that you can expect your developers to take 15 to 30% more time just because they're learning a new tool.
To put that into context, sorry for interrupting.
Sure.
Those are studies from by now 10 years ago, 15, some even older than 10 years ago. I think by now, for a lot more developers than 10 years ago, it's normal to know the tools to some degree already.
Or have used some kind of testing already.
Have you done some kind of automated testing and have heard at least about the fact that you can do things like test-first programming, test-driven development, and so on. So it's not entirely alien concepts anymore than when these studies first came out.
Boy, you'd be surprised. Some of the developers, well, actually, it's one of the things that the Drupal community really values is how open we've always been to total amateurs who are writing their very first line of PHP, and people have absolutely no idea. Well, what I wanted to ask you is, so we have this rough idea of what the cost is when you get your team into a testing suite. Do we have any idea of what the time savings is like? We're investing in the future. What's our return on investment?
So if I remember the numbers correctly from one of those studies, they said that without automated testing embedded into the development process, developers spend somewhere between 40 and 60% of their time on debugging. And that goes very close towards zero.
Wow.
When you're doing testing properly. So maybe not entirely down to 0%, but somewhere between 5 and 15%, maybe a lot less time spent on debugging. And that's time that you are working on features. And
so 40% more productivity. Easily.
Something like that.
Phew!
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing.
Hey, so Sebastian Bergmann, do you want to come to a DrupalCon sometime?
I would love to return to DrupalCon.
Which DrupalCon have you been to?
I've been to DrupalCon Europe in Prague. 2 years ago, 3 years ago?
2012? No, 13. 12 was Munich.
Yeah, 13.
13. And when you come to the next DrupalCon in Dublin this year,
okay,
what can we get you to drink?
See, I don't consume alcoholic beverages, but I don't know.
The tea in Ireland is very good.
I like a good tea. I also like a good hot chocolate. So
okay, all right.
I don't know if I would trust the Irish with hot chocolate. We can stick with tea.
fair enough.
So, to wrap up, thank you for PHPUnit because it's amazing. And honestly, there's so much value being derived from it, not only in making developers better, but making businesses better and more profitable. It's amazing. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Is there anything else that you want to pitch? Do you have a shameless plug of some kind? Your company?
Company, favorite product?
Like I said earlier, I'm not really a good salesperson,
Okay.
but I do have to make a living. So I'm a co-founder and principal consultant with the PHP consulting company, the PHP.cc, and we help companies from small web agencies to Fortune 500 companies make better use of the PHP platform.
Awesome.
That's fantastic.
Now we need a sound bite for our session in Mumbai.
No.
When you take this long to prepare, I start to get nervous about what you're actually going to say.
I'm not preparing anything. I don't know. What do you want? Just kidding.
Anything.
Okay. So hi, I'm Sebastian Bergmann. About 15 years ago, I created PHPUnit to help PHP developers build better software. I'm happy that, or I would like to congratulate the Drupal community on the release of Drupal 8. And as far as I know, PHPUnit played some role in that.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Very welcome.
Good.
Did we forget anything?
I don't think so. Everything I say afterwards will no longer
It's
be
off the record.